Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Unit 29, Lessons 141 through 144, which is going to be talking about the 1990s. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So going into the 1992 election, President George H.W. Bush went in with high ratings and a strong world presence. The domestic economy worked, while his moderate conservatism worked against him. The Republican Party was in no way, shape, or form unified during this point in time. A serious recession began in the 1990s that increased unemployment, and it appeared to be the huge annual federal budget deficits that were causing this. In addition, Bush's position as a moderate conservative didn't excite traditional Republicans who longed for the days of Ronald Reagan's decisive leadership and uncompromising stands. The conservatives had no one else to support, though, besides George H.W. Bush, so they were the one the party rallied behind, but they weren't unified in their want of him being president. Now, the Democratic Party, on the other hand, was becoming much more moderate than previous election cycles due to experiencing losses through liberal presidential candidates. A leading figure amongst these was a man named William Jefferson Clinton. Clinton was born in Hope, Arkansas in 1946. Originally William Jefferson Blythe III, he changed his name to match his stepfather's at 15. He went to match his stepfather's Roger Clinton and became William Jefferson Clinton. He actually, one experience of his was that he was able to go to the White House as a teenager and meet President Kennedy. That event confirmed in Clinton's mind his desire to move into the White House himself one day. Clinton achieved a stellar academic record going to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and was a Rhodes Scholar over in Oxford, England. He came back and attended Yale Law School, where he met his future wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, who would become Hillary Rodham Clinton, originally Hillary Rodham. After this, he moved back to Arkansas and began to pursue politics. He was elected to state attorney general in 1976 and elected governor of Arkansas in 1978. While not receiving the 1980 re-election, he was elected to governor every 2 years afterwards, up to 1990. Clinton got the nomination and selected a man named Al Gore to be his nominee for VP. Clinton's plan involved cutting income tax for the middle class, raising taxes on the wealthy, and ending federal budget deficits. He proposed ending welfare as we know it with quotation marks, and cutting military size and influence also. There were some questions about how Clinton avoided military service during the Vietnam War, with him quoted as saying that he loathed the military, alongside questions of his character. Clinton was known as very much as a political wheeler-dealer who was willing to sacrifice any principle to gain a political goal. So there was questions about Clinton's reputation, and his reputation as a womanizer also was one part that added to this questioning of his reputation. However, it didn't affect his campaign as much as it could have. There was a third-party candidate, interestingly enough. Texas billionaire H. Ross Perot organized what was known as the Reform Party and became a candidate for the 1992 election. He wanted the government simply and efficiently run like a business. He resisted labels such as liberal or conservative. He dropped out for a time but came back, and this didn't influence that much of the election. Clinton won with 43% of the popular vote and a 370 to 168 electoral college victory. Bush received 34% of the popular vote. Perot received 18% of the popular vote and no electoral votes. Now, once in office, Clinton began to pursue a more liberal agenda than he had indicated in his campaign. He lifted the ban on LGBTQ plus individuals serving in the military, which became the policy we know today as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Military leaders strongly opposed this policy change, saying it would hurt morale amongst the listed personnel. But Clinton's biggest priority, was to try to revamp the nation's health care through a socialized medicine plan, providing governmental health insurance for every American while also having the socialized medicine plan in place. Clinton's health insurance policy was met with very stiff opposition, both amongst Congress and amongst the public. Healthcare industries opposed the idea of a political governmental takeover. Small business owners objected to the idea of paying for the medical coverage for employees. They didn't want the added expense of helping to pay for medical coverage for these employees. And many Americans didn't like the idea of bureaucratizing medicine more than it currently was. By 1994, the health insurance policy idea was dead in the water, and Clinton dropped the idea for the rest of his term. The 1994 congressional election had the Republicans proposing what was known as the Contract with America agenda, in which it wanted to accomplish three things. The size of the House bureaucracy was promised to be cut. There would be things like family-friendly legislation, such as a child tax credit. And they would consider term limits for congressmen. The Democrats lost heavily in the 1994 election, and both houses of Congress went to the Republican Party, the first time since 1952 that this had occurred. New Republican House Speaker Newt Gingrich of Georgia began to work on the proposals given in the Contract with America. And of course, while the House passed several bills, interestingly enough, not many made it to law because of the Senate's reluctance to go along with these bills. This 1994 election, it's important for us to note, also showed the power of the growing religious right movement. The most prominent group in this was known as the Christian Coalition, which had begun in 1989 as heir to Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority. They are basically the children of the Moral Majority movement and are still a pretty big voter base. Soon after taking office, Clinton abandoned his idea of the promise of a middle-class tax cut and instead sought to balance the federal budget via a combination of spending cuts and tax increases. He was able to get his plan through Congress on a close vote, and the annual federal budget deficit began shrinking, actually. The fiscal 1998 budget showed a surplus for the first time since 1969, and the government was able to pay back some of the federal debt. Clinton also in his term, Clinton gained approval of the North American Free Trade Agreement that was previously being negotiated with Canada and Mexico by Bush. Now, what this North American Free Trade Agreement would do was create a free trade zone amongst the countries of North America, and create what would become the largest free trade zone in the world. A lot of people feared the loss of jobs in the U.S. as companies moved production to Mexico, where wage scales were lower. This was a thing that happened after it went into effect on January 1st, 1994. And the last thing that happened was in 1996, the Republican Congress passed the first major overhaul of the welfare system in decades. States now would receive federal grants from Washington to run their own welfare programs. The new plan limited the time that people could receive welfare and required that recipients enroll in a job training program. It cut food stamps, aids to families with dependent children, and other welfare programs. Liberal Democrats didn't like it, but Clinton knew it matched the mood of the country at this point in time. Clinton won re-election in 1996 and never lost his lead in the polls. Now, the Republicans nominated a man named Bob Dole, and Bob Dole was the last veteran from World War II that would run as a major party candidate. Dole had sought the GOP nomination before and had been Gerald Ford's vice presidential running mate in 1976. Clinton was reelected with 49% of the popular vote, with Dole receiving 41% and Ross Perot, who decided to run again, gaining 8% of the vote, and a 379 to 159 electoral victory. The growing economy was a major factor in Clinton's win. One major factor of this economic growth was the growing investment in tax-sheltered retirement accounts, as more people invested in things called mutual funds, funds run by managers who pool investments from many individuals. These managers didn't go buy stock, which provides money to businesses. Said businesses invest money in new production, and this increased investment helped stimulate growth and cause the stock market to increase to new heights, as shown by the growth in the Dow Jones Industry Average. The Dow Jones Industry Average is the best-known measure of the health of the American businesses by looking at the stocks of the 30 largest and most important businesses in America. Now, these shift year to year. Your book primarily brings up ExxonMobil, Walmart, and AT&T as ones that are on this list. If I remember correctly, Amazon is on this list. Don't quote me on that one, though. Regardless, the Dow Jones Industry Average grew exponentially. It had a 2,000 point closure in 1987 to an 11,497 point closure in 1999. The Federal Reserve Board also helped increase the economy's growth during this time by holding down inflation, by adjusting the discount rate it would charge member banks for money. When it lowered the rate that it charged, home buying became more affordable, and loans for businesses become more affordable. If the economy gets too active, it increases this discount rate, raising it, effectively lowering said discount rate. All right, and controlling inflation that way. Let's go ahead and let's talk about some of the issues within the 1990s, because there was a lot of issues that plagued the 1990s. The first was a new wave of immigrants arriving in the 1980s and 1990s, with about 14 million people arriving in just 2 decades. Latin Americans made up the largest number of these newcomers. Asian immigration also increased rapidly, while only 12% of immigrants coming in were from Europe. By 2000, over 28 million people in the US, about 10% of the population, were born in another country, about half of them Latin American. Most of these immigrants settled in California, Florida, New York, Illinois, and New Jersey, with Miami, Florida, and San Antonio, Texas becoming majority Hispanic cities. Many Americans, the main reason why this was an issue of the 1990s was because many Americans struggled to accept and assimilate these newcomers into American society. Many state cultures now faced questions. How do we help these populations? How do we deal with prejudiced mindsets amongst our populace? How do we educate and employ large number of people who don't speak the same language as us? So there was that question starting to brew amongst American society. The next question was the growth of what were known as militia movements in the 1990s. As that dissatisfaction from the 1970s with government grew into a lack of trust in the government, And it grew into a lack of trust and a reaction of open hostility towards the federal government. Some groups in the 1990s took advantage of this skepticism and the level of open and violent hostility to show their opposition in ways from refusing to pay taxes to setting up armed camps to resist federal intrusion into their lives. White supremacists took this further with a resentment towards non-white people whose numbers were growing rapidly in America due to the waves of immigrants coming in. Some also had unorthodox religious beliefs, but many groups amongst this had violent resistances that led to tragedy. One example of this being Randy Weaver and his family in 1992, who held off federal agents at his home in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, after Weaver failed to appear in court to answer charges dealing with the illegal possession and use of weapons. During the confrontation, a federal agent ended up shooting and killing Weaver's wife and son as they stood in the doorway of Randy Weaver's cabin. The Branch Davidians in 1993 were another example of this militia movement. A religious group in Waco, Texas, called the Branch Davidians, led by David Koresh, were rumored to be stockpiling weapons, engaging in child abuse, and holding people there against their will. While agents of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms tried to serve a warrant at the group's compound, people inside the compound fired on the agents. This led to a siege of the compound for 51 days. It was a situation that appeared bounded in tragedy as neither side would communicate with the other. And on April 19th, 1993, that tragedy happened. The compound burst into flames and almost 80 people were killed in the ensuing fire. Anti-government groups saw Ruby Ridge and Waco incidents as proof that the federal government was their real enemy. Enemies, sadly. Violence also began emerging in public schools in the 1990s. There were school shooting incidents that occurred in Paducah, Kentucky, Jonesboro, Arkansas, and in Springfield, Oregon, in which students opened fire on teachers and classmates. None of these brought up questions of what we should do related to things like gun control, but the one that truthfully brought up the most discussion of this type of talk was on April 20th, 1999, when 18-year-old Eric Harris and 17-year-old Dylan Keibold killed 12 students and a teacher at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. They also wounded 30 others before taking their own lives. In response to this and previous incidents, President Clinton and others called for tougher gun control laws in an effort to stop this violence. On a happier note, the 1990s saw a dramatic increase in the use of computers in every walk of life. The first computer was invented in 1944, with the invention of the transistor in 1947, and the microprocessor or microchip in 1971. The first real personal computer, as we know it today, became available around 1975. One of the main reasons why computers became so popular was because they were able to perform multiple functions that used to require many different pieces of equipment. They brought the revolution to homes, not just businesses. One of the main reasons, not too long ago, a person would have to use different equipment to write a letter, perform numerical calculations, design a building, play video games. Today, one computer can do all of those tasks and so much more, as we know, living in the age of the coronavirus, where we not only communicate via online information, but we also can learn, we can play video games, we can do all sorts of things now utilizing that and the internet. Speaking of the internet, The internet was developed by an agency of the Defense Department in 1969, with other agencies creating their own internet networks. These were a vast network of computers that enabled a personal computer to do even more functions and actually connect an individual with the world. The National Science Foundation and governmental agencies created networks that linked even more computers than just this. Some colleges also got involved with developing their own form of internet access. Now, the first browser for what became the World Wide Web was unveiled in 1991. Companies, governmental agencies, organizations, and individuals created websites or web pages to provide information about themselves and others. Today, the internet offers over 2 billion websites that enable email, audio, and video communication between users. The internet also enabled the dot-com economy, or the dot-com boom, in the 1990s, as business owners and investors worked to figure out how to utilize the internet in their businesses. Many online businesses failed at this point in time as the supply of them exceeded consumer demand, and some businesses, like the online ordering of groceries, actually didn't generate enough interest at that point in time. The boom began to wane in the last years of the decades, but it's important to realize that this was really the beginning of the internet as we know it. This is really where the idea of internet and an internet business and things like that really started off. It seemed like a new frontier for businesses, even if many online businesses failed initially. So let's go ahead and let's talk about foreign policy. Now, the Clinton administration faced a lot of difficult situations in many parts of the world. In general, the president wanted to support democracy and peace, but his government never formulated anything more specific when it came to policy goals. When Clinton became president, there were a whole bunch of areas of the world that he had to address. One example was Somalia. In Somalia, East Africa, where political anarchy led to widespread starvation, before even Clinton was in office, President Bush had gained UN backing, United Nations backing, for American troops to go into the country and restore order and assist the civilian population. By 1993, international forces had begun entering the country, and American forces withdrew from the area. The American presence helped the immediate crisis, but the basic problem of political instability still continued. Now, the intervention in Somalia was an effort by American military to carry out a policy called nation building. There was a lot of debate that arose over whether or not this was a proper action for the U.S. to take. Was the U.S. right in attempting to build, well, primarily was the U.S. military right in coming in and trying to help build a country when it's primarily trained to fight and win wars? Now, this policy could lead to American troops being made vulnerable as they tried to enforce a peace without clear front lines and with various domestic factions fighting each other. Political instability continued, but Somalia formed a new government in 2004. Another area was Haiti in 1990, when the Caribbean island nation of Haiti was in turmoil, and the former president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, was elected president after a period of military rule. Aristide was overthrown by a coup. I can English, I promise. Was overthrown by a coup, and Haitians began fleeing the area to Florida. Now, Clinton permitted former President Jimmy Carter to actually negotiate with the military junta, who agreed to relinquish power. Aristide returned to power, and American forces were withdrawn. until another uprising drove him from power again and into exile in 2004. Arstride's successor was reelected president in 2006, however, but the political situation remains unsettled there also. In the Middle East, Israel and the Arab nations had been at war for decades at that point. Complicating this affair was the Palestine Authority, which claimed to govern the Palestine Muslims living on the West Bank of the Jordan River. Now, President Clinton urged that the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, be brought into the on and off Middle East peace talks because they were involved. An agreement reached in Oslo, Norway in 1993 called for Israel to allow Palestine self-rule in the Gaza Strip and in Jericho in exchange for a reduction of violence from the Palestine Liberation Organization. This arrangement was called Land for Peace, given control of the land to the Palestinians in exchange for a greater security for Israel against Muslim attacks. They shook hands, and the Oslo Accord was signed. And in October of 1994, Jordan and Israel signed a peace agreement. However, continued violence threatened the trend towards peace, and domestic policy within these countries weren't simple. It wasn't simple as just a simple peace agreement. Israel Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated in November of 1995 by a disgruntled Israeli who didn't like Rabin's moves for peace. The following January, Yasser Arafat was elected president of a new Palestinian Authority, which functioned as a government for the Palestinian people. Many in Israel feared and resented this development because it seemed like Palestine was gaining statehood. Meanwhile, going back to Israel, after that assassination, a man named Benjamin Netanyahu was elected prime minister in 1996 on a platform opposing the Land for Peace plan. He wanted to build new Jewish settlements, retake the Golan Heights from Palestine control, and oppose Palestinian statehood. In October of 1998, Clinton, Hussein, Arafat, and Netanyahu met at Y Mills, Maryland, and worked out a new Land for Peace deal. However, Netanyahu lost an election in Israel in the next year to a man named Ehud Barak, who promised to resume the peace efforts, actually. Clinton tried very hard to achieve some type of settlement during his last year as president, but he did not succeed in this. Egypt withdrew its ambassador status to Israel because of Israel's previous handling of the Palestine conflict, and in 2001, Israel elected Ariel Sharon and returned to a more confrontational position against Palestine. This resulted in more Palestinian terror attacks and more military attacks to Palestine from Israel. Terrorism began more attacks in the 1990s in the U.S. Some noteworthy examples, and what we can say now as a haunting preview of what would become September 11th, 2001, a bomb exploded in the underground garage of the World Trade Center in New York in February of 1993. 6 people were killed in this explosion. Explosion also occurred at the U.S. installations in Saudi Arabia in 1995 and 1996, killing a total of 26 people. In a coordinated attack the same day, in August of 1998, bombs placed outside the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania killed 220 people. After these attacks, the U.S. struck terrorist sites in Afghanistan and Sudan with single missiles, but otherwise the American response was very muted to these attacks. The most notable attack during this point in time was against what was known as the USS Cole in October 12th of 2000. when a bomb was set off on the side of the destroyer ship. 17 were killed and 39 were injured as the bomb blew a hole into the side of the boat. The attack was linked to Osama bin Laden, but no military retaliation was made in response to this attack. One last trouble that occurred was in the Balkan Peninsula. Now, the former Yugoslavia had splintered in 1991 after the end of communist rule. Slovenia, Croatia, Macedonia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, which had been parts of Yugoslavia, declared their own independence. This left Serbia and Montenegro as the only countries left making up Yugoslavia. The Serbian minorities caused a lot of ethnic conflict in Bosnia and Croatia, and these Serbians received aid from Yugoslavia, especially from its Serbian president, Slobodan Milosevic. Initially, American aid was limited to simply helping the Bosnians, but with new U.S. and other NATO countries establishing a military presence there, that included enforcement of a no-fly zone and air support for UN troops, they were able to act in a more meaningful manner. In 1995, the Dayton Accord was signed that split Bosnia into a Muslim Croat Federation and a Bosnian Serb Republic. This brought a ceasefire that was signed in October of 1995. And there was a period of peace until trouble erupted again in 1998 within the Yugoslavian province of Kosovo. The Serbian president at the time, still Slobodan Milosevic, reasserted Serbian control and began to practice ethnic cleansing of the Albanian Muslim majority, who fled to Macedonia and Albania to escape. The U.S. requested that the NATO forces attack Yugoslavia to ease pressures on Kosovo, and NATO launched its first attack of a sovereign country. After 72 days, Milosevic accepted the terms for peace, and Kosovo was granted limited autonomy in the area. Serbia and Montenegro, after all of this, are both now independent republics, and Kosovo actually became a largely autonomous region in Serbia that declared its own independence in 2008. The last thing we have to talk about is the second ever impeachment of a president, the impeachment and trial of Bill Clinton. So, a few months after Bill Clinton took office in 1993, an independent counsel was appointed to investigate both Clinton's involvement in the 1970s with the Whitewater Development Company. This involved it primarily focused on Bill Clinton, but also involved Hillary Clinton, too. Bill Clinton had been governor of Arkansas at this point in time, and Hillary Clinton was a partner in the Little Rock law firm in 1970, and around the 1970s period. Now, the Whitewater Development Company proved to be a fraud, and the savings and loan company involved had misused funds from a Clinton gubernatorial campaign, a campaign for governor. The goal was to find if any wrongdoing connected to Bill Clinton had occurred. Now, during this point in time, it had also been found that Hillary had been doing legal work for the Whitewater Company while her husband was governor, creating a potential conflict of interest, but this was not the main focus of the trial, and therefore we'll be just kind of skipping over this for now. Kenneth Starr was named Whitewater's independent counsel for 1994. And also in 1994, a woman named Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee, filed a suit against the president, charging him with making unwanted advances towards her. Clinton denied this accusation, but while searching for evidence, Evidence of an affair was found between Clinton and a White House intern named Monica Lewinsky, which Clinton also denied. The president gave a deposition under oath to the investigators of the Jones case and withheld information about Lewinsky. Now, for the majority of public opinion, most people said that the affair was wrong if it did happen, but Clinton was a good president. On August 6th, 1998, Monica Lewinsky appeared before a grand jury investigating Whitewater and Clinton after an agreement was reached protecting her from prosecution. The former intern admitted to an affair with the president, but said that she was never asked to lie about it. 11 days later, on August 17th, 1998, President Clinton became the first chief executive to give testimony to a grand jury, admitting to relations with Lewinsky. That evening, Clinton went on national television and admitted to public that the affair had taken place. His previous denials were meant to protect his family and protect himself from embarrassment, but those denials were not true. The president was very defensive during his announcement, and the public condemned him heavily for this defensiveness. Starr submitted a 445-page report in September of 1998, stating the president had not only lied under oath, but may had obstructed justice. When public opinion fully began condemning the president's defensive posture, Clinton backpedaled and began expressing more contrition for his actions, more regret over his actions. He began meeting regularly with well-known ministers and a kind of accountability group. Now, the House Judiciary Committee, which had the responsibility of initiating impeachment procedures, voted along party lines recommending a full investigation that may lead to possible impeachment charges. 4 charges of impeachment were submitted against President Bill Clinton: 2 for lying under oath, and 2 obstructions of justice and lying to Congress. Only 1 perjury charge and only 1 obstruction of justice charge were passed against him, though. On January 7th, 1999, the second impeachment trial of a U.S. president began. No witnesses were called, but 3 videotaped depositions were shown to senators, including one by Lewinsky. Most Democrats agreed that a censure resolution against the president would be better to pass, but no resolution was considered. The impeachment trial lasted about 5 weeks, but the outcome for Bill Clinton was never really in doubt. President Clinton was not removed from office due to a lack of want of that happening from both sides. Democrats were going to support the president as much as they could, and Republicans did not pursue the case as vigorously as they could have. The perjury charge itself was defeated 45-55. On the obstruction of justice charge, senators were split 50-50. Responding to all of the votes, Clinton said that he was profoundly sorry for what he had done. On January 19th, 2001, Clinton's last full day in office, the president made a deal with Robert Ray, Starr's successor. He admitted that certain statements had been false, made in the Paula Jones case, and the president agreed to pay a $25,000 fine to the Arkansas Bar Association and to forfeit his license for the next 5 years. In return for this, Ray agreed that Clinton would not be indicted on criminal charges once he left office. Ray filed his final report on the Lewinsky affair in March of 2002, stating that the Office of Independent Counsel had gathered enough evidence to indict and possibly convict Clinton on perjury and obstruction of justice charges in a regular court. These scandals cost Clinton much of his respect and influence during the last 3 years in office, affecting the position once again greatly, affecting how the American people perceived such a position. But with that, we are going to end it there. And next week, we will be talking about America in the new millennium, talking about America from 2000 through to the administration of Barack Obama. But with that, I will see you guys next week. Have a good rest of your day.